Hey, everybody, and welcome back for another deep dive with us. Today, we're going to be looking into the death of adult film star Anna Pauli, and real name Ana Beatriz Pereira Alves. She was found dead in Brazil on January 23rd, and the circumstances surrounding her death are, well, they're pretty confusing to say the least.
Yeah, and what I find so interesting about this case is just the amount of information out there. A lot of it conflicting. Like you're trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are, I don't know, they just don't fit.
Yeah, exactly. So why don't we start with what we do know? We know that Anna was reportedly filming on a balcony at a hotel with two men. They were also in the adult film industry when she fell. But the stories that these men told police, they just don't add up.
Yeah, no, they don't. One of the biggest things that stands out to me is their description of what Anna was doing right before the fall. One guy claims that she was leaning on the railing, the other says she was walking around. You know, those two actions paint very different pictures of how stable she might have been.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
If she was just leaning on the railing, maybe it could have been a tragic accident, right? Like maybe the railing wasn't secure or she lost her balance. But if she was walking around, it kind of sounds like something else could have happened, something that caused her to fall.
Exactly. And that's where those conflicting accounts are. They're really important. If the police can't even figure out what Anna was doing, it's going to be really hard to figure out why she fell. Was it an accident? Was she pushed? Did something startle her? We just don't know yet.
It's all very unsettling. And the fact that both of these men were questioned by police and then released without any charges, that definitely adds to the mystery.
It really does. Makes you wonder what evidence the police actually have. Are they waiting for something specific, like the autopsy results? Or are they just not convinced that a crime occurred?
Yeah, I guess that's part of what makes this a good deep dive. There's so many layers to this story, and each piece of information seems to lead to more questions than answers.
Absolutely. And I think to understand those layers, we need to go back a little bit. We need to look at Anna's background. She wasn't just an adult film star. She was also a pretty popular influencer, particularly on platforms like OnlyFans.
And you know, from what I've read, there are reports that she may have felt pressure to create riskier content, to keep her audience engaged, which is a pretty disturbing thought.
Yeah, I can see that. Makes you think about the kind of pressures that people in that industry face, especially the ones with a large online presence. The constant need to produce new content, pushing boundaries, and, the potential for harassment or even threats if you don't meet the expectations of your fans.
It's a side of online fame that we don't really talk about enough, and it makes me wonder if that pressure could have played a role in what happened to Anna. Could she have been pushed into a situation that led to her death?
It's definitely a possibility, and it's something that needs to be explored. But to get a clearer picture, I think we need to look more closely at the specifics of the investigation.
Okay, so let's do that. What are the police doing? What evidence are they focusing on?
Well, they're examining the hotel security footage. Hopefully it caught something useful. If there are cameras pointed at the balcony, they might actually show what happened.
That would be huge. But what if they weren't pointed at the balcony? Was there anything else that the footage might show?
Well, even if it didn't capture the fall itself, it could show who was coming and going from the room. Maybe even an argument or some unusual behavior. Even little details could be important.
So they're trying to piece together a timeline.
Exactly. Like a detective show, right?
Yeah.
And along with the footage, they're also interviewing hotel staff. Maybe somebody saw something, signs of a struggle, someone leaving in a hurry. Even small details could be important.
That makes sense. What about Anna's phone? I feel like that could have a lot of information.
You're right. Investigators are looking at her phone records. It could show who she was talking to, what she was posting online, even her location in the hours leading up to her death.
So they're basically creating like a digital footprint of her last day.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And then, of course, there's the autopsy, which will hopefully tell us exactly how she died. Was it the fall itself, or was something else going on?
That's where things get really interesting, right? The autopsy results could confirm what we think we know, or completely change the direction of the investigation.
Absolutely. It's definitely one of the most important pieces of evidence in this case, and it could really help us understand what happened to Anna Pauli. And, while we wait for those autopsy results, it's worth thinking a little bit more about, this idea of pressure in the adult film industry, especially with all these online platforms now, like OnlyFans.
Right, because it's one thing to hear that Anna might have felt pressured, but it's another thing to actually understand what that looks like.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, think about it. On a platform like OnlyFans, success depends on constantly creating new content. And the more extreme or shocking the content is, the more attention it gets, the more subscribers.
So it's not just about like making a lot of content. It's about pushing the boundaries of what's acceptable or even safe.
Yeah, and that's a huge part of it. The problem is that pressure to constantly push it further, it can create a dangerous environment.
Yeah, I can see how someone could start to feel trapped in that. Like they had to keep doing more and more to keep their audience happy, even if it puts them at risk.
And that's what worries a lot of people about this industry. It's not just the physical risks either.
You're talking about the emotional and psychological toll.
Exactly. Imagine that constant scrutiny, the judgment, the harassment, the bullying. It's a lot to handle, and it can really wear someone down.
And we have to remember that a lot of people in this industry are young. Some are even teenagers. They might not have the experience or the support systems to deal with that kind of pressure.
That's such an important point, and it's why I think talking about Anna Pauly's death is so important. We need to be talking about these issues, and we need to think about how to make things safer for people in this industry.
It feels like this case is opening up a lot of questions
Mhm.
about online content creation, fan culture, the responsibilities of these platforms.
It really does, and I don't think we have all the answers. But we need to keep asking these questions and keep pushing for change.
So let's shift gears a little bit. I want to talk about Anna's boyfriend, Pedro Henrique. He's been all over social media talking about his grief, demanding justice for Anna.
Yeah, his posts are really hard to read. He clearly loved her a lot. And I think he's having a really hard time with all of this.
What's interesting is that he's also talking about the pressure Anna was facing, hinting that maybe she wasn't happy with where her career was going.
That's a really important detail. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, about the demands of online content creation.
Right. Like maybe she was feeling trapped or pressured.
Exactly. Makes you wonder if anyone knew how she was feeling, if she had anyone to talk to about it.
It's just a reminder that you never really know what someone is going through, even if they seem to have it all.
Yeah. I think it's so important to check in on the people you care about, even the ones who seem fine.
Couldn't agree more. But let's get back to the investigation for a second. Besides the autopsy results, are there any other developments we should be looking out for?
Well, one thing that stands out is the questioning of a third man. He was reportedly at the hotel that night, apparently working as a videographer for Anna and the two other men.
So this is someone who may have actually seen what happened.
Potentially, his testimony could be really important, especially if he was filming when Anna fell.
I'm curious to see what he has to say. It could back up the stories the other two men told or completely contradict them.
Right. His account just adds another layer to all of this.
It's like every time you think you have the full picture,
Mm-hmm.
another piece appears and changes everything.
That's a good way to put it. I think that's what makes this case so fascinating. The truth is out there somewhere. It's our job to find it.
And that brings us to the big question. What are the potential causes of Anna Pauly's death?
Well, based on what we know, there are a few possibilities. And each one is pretty complicated.
Okay, so let's break it down. Let's start with the most straightforward scenario, an accident. Is that even plausible, given the information we have?
Yeah, I mean, especially with the reports of drug and alcohol use. If she was impaired, it's not hard to imagine her losing her balance or, misjudging the edge of the balcony.
Right, and even balconies themselves aren't always that safe, even when someone is sober. A loose railing, a slippery surface, even a strong gust of wind could cause someone to fall.
So even a little misstep could have turned into something really tragic, especially with those other factors. But the thing that makes me question the accident theory is those different stories from the two men who were with her. You'd think if it was an accident, their stories would match up, right?
That's what's been bothering investigators. It's why they haven't ruled out foul play yet. Those inconsistencies could mean they're hiding something, maybe even trying to protect each other.
Okay, so let's talk about that. What if there was foul play? What are we even looking at here? Well, there's a whole range of possibilities. Could be something small, like a push that was meant to be playful but went too far. Or it could be something much worse, like an intentional act of violence.
It's hard to imagine someone would want to hurt her. But I guess we can't rule anything out at this point. What would investigators be looking for to figure out if there was foul play?
The autopsy is going to be key. It'll show if there were any injuries that don't make sense for just a fall, like signs of a struggle or defensive wounds.
And I'm sure they'll be going over that security footage with a fine-tooth comb, looking for anything suspicious.
Exactly. And they'll be looking at her phone records, too, seeing if she was getting any threats or if she was talking to anyone who might have wanted to hurt her.
It's a horrible thought. But it's part of the investigation. They have to follow every lead.
They do, and, we also have to remember that even if the fall itself was an accident, there might still be some criminal negligence. For example, if the men knew she was really intoxicated, And they still let her go out on the balcony alone, they could still get in trouble.
So even if they didn't mean to hurt her, someone's actions could have still led to her death.
Exactly. Which is why it's so important to wait for all the evidence before we decide what happened.
It's definitely a lot to think about. And I gotta say, it's hard to think about Anna Pauley, this confident, successful influencer,
Hmm.
and imagine that she was struggling with all this behind the scenes.
I get that. It reminds us that we never really know what's going on in someone's life, even if they seem to have it all together online.
And it just makes this whole thing even more tragic, knowing that she might have been going through things that we had no idea about.
It really emphasizes how important empathy and compassion are. And it reminds us that there's a real person behind every online persona.
Well said. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask you one last question. Based on everything we've talked about,
Right.
what do you think is the most important thing for our listeners to take away from this?
I think the biggest thing to remember is that this is still an ongoing investigation. We don't have all the facts yet. It's important not to jump to conclusions or spread rumors.
All right, we need to let the investigation run its course.
Exactly. I think Anna Polly's story is a really powerful reminder about how complicated online life can be, the pressures that people in the public eye face, and the importance of remembering that there's a whole person behind the persona.
That's something I hope our listeners will really think about.
And I encourage everyone to stay informed, stay engaged, and most importantly, stay compassionate.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll be back soon with another story to explore. Until then, stay curious and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.